Hard way. All right. So we're back, and the Swivl's not working properly, so I might have to sort of stay mostly in this position. Trying to think if there's questions from you guys about stuff. Right off. So orders of business type things. Obviously, a lot of you have already submitted your exam things. I appreciate it. I haven't looked at them yet. If I've run into any kind of issues with viewing them as far as the formatting or something, I'll let you know. My hope is that over the weekend I can get cracking on those and get some grading done. But obviously grading is one of the toughest parts of the teaching experience, right? So, maybe I should put this on even though it's not swiveling. At least I'll get the microphone benefit. So there's that. So the exam, if you haven't submitted your exam, then there's no time like today, before tonight at midnight. You can do it. You can get it in. The other thing is, you may or may not have seen an announcement from me on our Canvas page, but I did put out another discussion question for us on foundationalism and coherentism, which is kind of what I was going to talk about, get you guys talking about with me today. And then, what else did I do out there? Well, I posted the video from Monday's meeting, and if this will at least continue to record and not run out of battery power, I'll post this one as soon as I can as well. So here's an ideal situation, but I'm somewhat flexible. If you can get an initial sort of response to the prompt for the 4th discussion board, out there by midnight Sunday, or even Monday before our meeting here, then that gives me time to see what people are saying. Because I'd really like to use that as sort of the on-the-fly plan for what we do in our meetings, rather than me just stand up here and didactically lecture and show you overheads and stuff. I mean, I've got them. If we need to do that, we can. I've yet to get the latest round of overheads and notes out there, but I'll do that too. That's something I forgot to do. So that'll help me if you can do that. And then as far as like your minimum one reply or whatever to a classmate, that could be by next Wednesday or something. That'd be ideal. So we want to talk a little bit, or at least I wanted to talk a little bit about the bulk of what chapter 4 is about. And it's a long chapter. It's like 40 pages long. And you know this if you already read it. And some of this stuff you have to kind of go back through pretty slowly and reread it to kind of fully digest it. But so what he's mostly up to there is he's showing how you can fill out evidentialism in a couple of different ways, and he uses the regress argument, which is a famous argument in epistemology, to kind of bring up this whole question of the structure of our knowledge or justified belief. And really, the whole debate between foundationalism and coherentism, and then some of the other things like infinitism and skepticism, it's really, as I see it, a debate about the structure of our knowledge, right? How it sort of hangs together. And so the regress argument is what sort of starts that whole discussion. But before I say any more, I'd rather hear what you guys think. As a thing in the future too, as you're reading through these chapters, if you come across stuff you disagree with, or that you don't especially that you don't understand, make a note to yourself, like flag it somehow, and email me, and then I'll be prepared to discuss it in class, and it'll benefit everybody. So right off the bat, any things that people wanted to?
With coherentism?
Yeah.
How it's saying like the beliefs, if I form a new belief, I can form it based off of like a prior belief that I had, right?
Right.
And these prior beliefs come from where?
From earlier beliefs, presumably, right? And background beliefs. So
he's saying like you have these. So coherentism pretty much says like you can have like a few basic beliefs that kind of just like happen and you form other beliefs off of there. Or like I sort of kind of got missed. Like,
okay.
Like where's the starting point? Is what my question was.
So here, let me just present kind of what I consider the scaled down version of it, and then I'll project Feldman's regress argument, because that's what I usually like to do, is sort of give the intuitive pitch, see if people kind of can grab onto the initial idea, and then try to formalize it as an actual set of premises leading to a conclusion, right? And I encourage you to do that in your own writing as well. So whether it's the final paper that gets revised or a handout that you would make when you give your presentation to the class or whatever. So here's the idea. Take any belief that you think you're justified in right now, right? And we know from what we read in chapter 3 that in order for a belief to be knowledge, right, it's got to conform to JTB plus whatever it takes to get around Gettier, right? So the justification condition is what we're really focused on here. So take some belief like, let's be B1. Your belief that you're in a room with other people, or that the projector's on, or it's cold outside, whatever it might be. If this belief is to count as knowledge, then it has to be justified by something, right? And so you say, well, what's your justification for B1? And you say, well, I'm just going to go in this direction. And that's B2. Ah, great. Got a justifier, right? This is my justification. My reasons, my evidence, whatever. But we'll just focus on beliefs for now rather than experiences. And so you say, that's great. So B1 gets justified by B2. And what's the justification for B2? Right? And so it goes, well, it could go to a couple different things. Maybe it's B3 and B4. Right? And so you say, well, what about these guys? What's justifying them? I mean, if they're, in order for them to be justified, they have to get the justification from someplace, right? So you see where this is going. What's the problem?
Just keep on going.
Seems like there's no, seems like this could just go back forever, right? Or that's a worry. So it looks like there's a couple different ways to go. One possibility is that the chain of reasons, the chain of justification, is infinite and non-repeating, just goes out forever, right? So for any belief you pick, there's another belief that's its justification, right? And that process never ends. That view has not been defended much, but recently, by recently I mean since I've been here at UNCG, so the past 14 years, I think it was probably around 2004 or 5 maybe, we had a symposium, and Peter Klein, who's a famous epistemologist, I think he's still teaching, but he might be in emeritus position now. But in any case, Peter Klein was at Rutgers and New York University. He's defended infinitism, which is the idea that that's an appropriate way that the chain could go. It could just go back forever, infinitely. But most people haven't gone that route. That's been sort of a very minority kind of approach. Here's another possibility, is that you've got something like this. I'm just to keep it simple. Say that the justification for this one is, B sub n, whatever, right? And then you say, well, what's the justification for B sub n? It's back over here, right? So it loops back around in a big circle. And this is coherentism, right? We can talk some about that. Coherentism has received a lot more attention, I'd say, in the past maybe 25 years. Prior to that, I mean, if you go back into like the history of epistemology, and you look at people like, I would think Plato, Descartes, Locke, the British empiricists, these folks, they're almost without exception foundationalists, right? That's their view. That's kind of classical foundationalism. Feldman formulates a version, Cartesian foundationalism, right? So we've got the infinitism, where the chain of reasons is infinite and unending, it just goes back forever. We've got the thing looping back onto itself, which is the coherence picture, and then there's one final kind of picture.
Well, before you erase that,
Yeah.
how's that not circular reasoning? Which you?
Oh, it is.
But
It is.
aren't you pretty much like more times than not shied away from like that approach of reasoning?
Oh yeah, great. We can talk about that some too, but yeah, I mean, it's funny Dominic points it out like this. Why is this not circular reasoning? It is circular reasoning, but isn't that bad? Well, I mean, here's it. You want the short version or the long version? I'll start with the short version.
Yeah.
If you push a coherentist on this sort of thing, what they normally say is, well, little circles are bad, but big circles are okay. I mean, it really does kind of come down to that. Now, you can probably tell from my tone that, I like thinking about coherentism. I like thinking about all this stuff. I like thinking about skepticism, even though I'm not a skeptic. But I'm not a coherentist. There have just some names I can throw in as we're kind of talking about it for your benefit, because you might end up writing your paper on one of these topics and there'd be the people there to look at. So the main defenders of coherence theory, contemporary coherence theory, are Keith Lear, and Larry Bonjour for a long time was a major defender, but he's now converted to foundationalism. He got persuaded ultimately that coherentism is not going to work. So this is the coherentist picture. And another famous defender of coherentism is Quine. People have heard me talking about him before. So W.V.O. Quine. He was a Harvard philosopher. But he's got this picture that is kind of fun to think about. At least he describes it as the web of belief. So that's one possibility. So now we've got justification for B2. Gonna let that be, B sub n. However, this could just be however many intervening beliefs, right? So it could be a whole bunch of them. So I get to B sub n. You say, well, what's the justification for this one? Then what they say at this point is they say, well, justification for that is, let's just call it FB, foundational belief, or basic belief, justified basic belief. And then they say, okay, well, cool, what about that guy? What's its justification? And this is where things stop. Because at this point, what the foundationalist says is, well, it's justified, but it doesn't get its justification in virtue of any other beliefs, all right? And we call beliefs like that either foundational beliefs, or the terminology that I kind of am most familiar with, I guess, from my graduate study was basic beliefs, just basics, justified basics. That's what Feldman calls them. So this belief right here is justified, and so it has the ability to impart justification, right? It can transmit justification upwards to these other beliefs in the superstructure, if you will, but it doesn't get its justification from any other beliefs. It gets it some other way, right? A fourth possibility, which is still on the table as far as I'm concerned, is skepticism, that there simply aren't any justified beliefs, right? How would you get to skepticism from all of this? Well, you could say, look, the only possibilities are infinitism, foundationalism, and coherentism. None of those will work out, and if they're all defective, then the only alternative looks to be skepticism about our knowledge. So this is sort of the foundationalist picture of things right here. And if you've read it, which I'm assuming everybody has, then you know that the details make a difference, and that there are a bunch of questions that foundationalists, coherentists, and infinitists have to answer. And of course, if you're tempted by skepticism, then you've got a different project on your hands. Here's the argument. And like I said, I'll try to get this stuff put out there for us on Canvas, just so you have it if you want it. So the first sort of thing we have to distinguish is between the basics and the non-basics, right? And the idea is that so foundationalism is kind of a caste system, if you will. It's a two-tiered system, right? We've got the basic beliefs, which are not justified in virtue of any other beliefs or connections to other beliefs. And then you've got what we call the inferred beliefs, or the non-basic beliefs, the derived beliefs. Those are the ones that get justified in virtue of the basics, all right? So I've got definitions here of these things, but it's not anything too crazy there. And I'll slide this down. So here's an argument that we can think about. If you've taken, say, an intro course at some point and did some philosophy of religion, then you might have talked about Thomas Aquinas' second way. People familiar with Aquinas' second way to prove that God exists? It's the so-called first cause argument. People heard of that?
Yeah,
Maybe, sort of, kind of. Yeah, heard about it and forgot about it. Hopefully not in the same day, right? This is not good. I don't need to be doing this. Well, the reason I bring it up is because it's reminiscent of that structurally, right? I mean, the first cause argument from Thomas Aquinas says basically the following. It says that every physical thing, every material thing has to have a cause. The universe is a material thing, so that means the universe has to have a cause. If the universe has a cause, then there's only three possibilities, right? Either the universe caused itself, or the causal sequence is infinite, goes back forever, right? Or it goes back a long, long time, and then it stops. It sort of grounds out in something. What is the thing that stops it? Well, according to Aquinas, it's an uncaused first cause. The only suitable candidate for an uncaused first cause, according to Aquinas, is God, the God of Catholic Christianity. And then he argues that the other, so then from that point on, you've got that linking premise, right, that states the three options. All you do is you just bump out the options that you don't want. So he argues that the universe can't cause itself because that's incoherent. Self-causation doesn't make any sense. The argument for that is that if a thing were to cause itself, then it would have to be prior to itself, because causes always precede their effects. But that doesn't make any sense. That's crazy. He argues that the causal sequence can't be infinitely long either. He gives us sort of an argument for that, but basically he thinks that if it were infinitely long, then it would never get started, and so we wouldn't have anything here now. And so if that's correct, then the only alternative, of course, is what he's after, which is that our universe is the end result of an uncaused first cause. Interesting argument. So these infinite regress style arguments where you basically state the different possibilities and on pain of regress argue for one position are pretty common in philosophy. So here's the argument, right? Either they're justified beliefs or there aren't any. Start with that. So either they're justified beliefs or each justified belief has an evidential chain that is one of these things, right? Terminates in an unjustified belief, is an infinite regress of beliefs, is circular, right? And so then he just knocks these guys out one at a time, and you end up with a conclusion. Just to reinforce some terminology from days of old, that's valuable for you guys to keep in your minds. First thing we want to do when we get an argument is what? See if we agree with the conclusion. Please say no.
Yeah.
Please say no. That's not what you do. Yeah, good. You're philosophy students. You might go to graduate school. You kind of know this stuff, right? So yeah, that's what my intro students say. See if I agree with the conclusion or not. No, don't do that, right? I mean, we're not trying. It's not a popularity contest. We're trying to get to the truth. We're trying to get to the truth here, you know. So the first thing I always want to do, and I try to reinforce to students, is think about the form of the argument, right? You've got an argument. You want to know if it's well formed. What that means is it valid or is it cogent? Is it an instance of deductive reasoning or inductive reasoning? In this particular case, hopefully it's obvious that the argument's a valid argument. What that means, again, is that if the premises were true, then the conclusion would have to be true. In other words, it'd be impossible for all the premises to be true while the conclusion is false. So it passes the first test of being a good argument. The second thing you have to think about after the form is you have to think about the merits of the premises. Are all these premises worthy of acceptance, worthy of belief, right? If they are, if they're all justified individually and taken together in consideration by your total evidence, then I say that's a strong argument and you should accept the conclusion, right? So you see the different options we've got here. I didn't mention the infinite regress thing here, or I didn't mention that as infinitism as an option down here, but it's on the table for people who find that appealing. I don't know if I still have the Peter Klein paper. I'm sure it appeared somewhere, but you could take a look at it if you wanted to. But foundationalism and coherentism are the main rivals, assuming that you're not going to go skeptical. And historically, foundationalism is far and away the dominant position. All the early moderns, for the most part, as I said, you know, they're as far as their epistemology goes, it's typically foundationalist in its structure. So that's kind of the overall sort of picture. So what do people think? Good argument for foundational beliefs? For basics?
I find it interesting that you said that it was the most popular in epistemology.
Yeah, well, I would think certainly in the history of epistemology, I think foundationalism is a dominant view, because the regress argument goes back a long way, right? I mean, you can argue that you could find it in Aristotle or Sextus Empiricus or any of these other philosophers in the ancient world, right? You can find the argument going back that far. So it seems like there's got to be some response to it, right? We have to have something to say. So yeah, continue, Alan.
It's awfully convenient.
Yeah,
How do we know where the ending is? How do we know we reached a foundation?
When you get to them.
Yeah.
So good. Here's something to think about, because it may not have been clear from how Feldman discusses it in the chapter, but I think he does a really good job. I think it's a good discussion, as he raises all the questions we want answered. We want to know what makes the basics basic. We want to know which kinds of beliefs qualify for basic status. We want to know what's the connection between the basics and the derived beliefs, the inferred beliefs. Those are all the sort of classic questions we have to get answers to. And we can look at some of those details, and especially if people have questions about particular ones. But here's sort of the way I think about it, right? Just a very simplified kind of picture of things, and not necessarily meant to be psychologically realistic. You'll notice in the chapter, if you read it closely, there are times when he's talking about justified belief, and then there are times when he's talking about well-founded belief, right? Anybody remember what the difference was between those two? We talked about it a little bit last time.
I'm sorry, what was the first one? Something really
So there's a justified. So there's this distinction between a belief's being justified and a person's belief being well-founded.
I think a belief can be justified, but a person doesn't necessarily have to have the belief.
Right.
Whereas a belief that's well-founded
Right.
is someone who actually has to believe that it's justified.
Yeah, thanks. And to tweak what you said, Alan, which is really right on track. So we can talk about a beliefs being justified for a person even if they don't form the belief, even if they don't have it. So there's all kinds of things you're justified in believing right now, but you haven't actually got the belief because you're not considering those propositions, right? But if I were to call your attention to them, all of a sudden, like your belief that you're in a room with other people, that's one you were justified in before I mentioned it, but you probably weren't thinking about it, although who knows, right? We've got some fans of skepticism here, so maybe some people were. But in any case, so there's whether or not a certain proposition or a certain belief would be justified were you to form it, and then there's the question of have you actually got that belief, right? And then the last little thing I was going to add is making sure that you formed the belief on the basis of your justification. Because the worry is that, look, you might be justified in believing something. In other words, you've got adequate evidence to justify the belief. And if you were to go on and form the belief using that evidence, then it would be well-founded for you, right? But suppose that, and this happens unfortunately in real life, people neglect their evidence, people misevaluate their own evidence. They think they've got evidence for things they don't, and they fail to appreciate that they've got evidence for things that they do. So we need to make sure that our evidence that our belief that we've gone ahead and formed is properly based on our evidence. There's some interesting literature, some hard stuff having to do with under what circumstances is a belief based on one's evidence. Is a problem involving a thing called the basing relation. But that's so here's kind of a general picture though that might help with the sort of the intuitive part. So you've got a belief, let's take a simple one, that the lights are on in this room. Oh, by the way, foundationalism seems to work really best. I mean, it's most congenial to thinking about perceptual justification for our perceptual beliefs. Though if it's going to be true in complete generality, it'd have to apply to testimonial beliefs and have to apply to memory beliefs and introspective beliefs and presumably maybe a priori insights as well. So keep that in mind, but you'll notice in a lot of the discussion, if you end up doing one of your articles, either presentation or final paper on the foundationalism coherentism dispute, then you'll notice that a lot of those authors focus on perception and perceptual justification. So our empirical beliefs about the world. So you believe that the lights are on in the room right now. That's justified for you, let's suppose. I hope everybody thinks they're justified in believing that. Even Alan, right? Even if it doesn't rise to the level of, even if it's not knowledge level justification, but it's justification nonetheless. Because there's that distinction as well, right? I mean, you might think, look, because there's two kinds of skepticism at issue, right? There are people who are skeptical about our knowledge because they think that the things we think we know aren't true. And so if they're not true, there's no way they could count as knowledge, right? And then there are the people who say, well, look, I mean, I'm not worried about the truth of the claim. I'm just not convinced that your justification is sufficient, right? You have inadequate justification, and the skeptic won't give you any resources to get started, right? You try to appeal to something, and then they ask you, well, how do you know that? And you're off on the wheel at that point, right? So in any case, consider your belief that the lights are on in this room right now. It's a belief about the immediate environment, about, as I'll call it, an external world belief. And how many people are pretty familiar with Descartes? At least Descartes' epistemology. Good. Yeah, that helps a little bit. Thanks. Because a lot of this stuff dovetails nicely with Cartesian skepticism and worries that were of concern to Descartes, and so that can be a useful example for me to be able to appeal to. So for our purposes, the external world is what Descartes meant by it, which is everything beyond the immediate contents of your conscious experience. So you're allowed to appeal to your thoughts and feelings, your beliefs and desires, your sensations, right? You have access to all of that because that's part of your mind, sort of the way Descartes' thinking about it. And also you've got logic and mathematics at your disposal, and geometry. But what you don't get is you don't get the cup on the table handed to you for free. That's something we got to get justified in believing on this picture. And how are we going to do it? Using only the meager resources of our internal world, together with logic and math and geometry, if it'll help any, right? So you believe that the lights are on in the room. For that statement to be true, there really has to be a room, and there have to be lights, and they have to be on. And all of those are facts about the external world, because they far outstrip the immediate conscious contents of your experience, right? The immediate contents of your conscious awareness right now are limited to how it looks, not to how it actually is. This is the whole sort of modern problematic, at least in epistemology, is this kind of, can we bridge the gap between appearance and reality? There's how things look to us, and then there's how things are if you buy into the appearance-reality distinction, right? And once you admit that there's that gap, you open the door to the skeptic, right? In this case, a skeptic about the external world, about our knowledge of the external world. So here's how foundationalism could be put to use in this context. You say, well, I'm justified in believing that the lights are on in the room right now. What justifies that belief for me? Well, a natural thing to say is that I'm justified in believing that the lights are on because it looks that way, right? So here's my belief. This is my belief that the lights are on. Let's call that one B1. All right? What justifies that? Well, I can say I'm justified in believing that one because of another belief that I've got. It's my belief that it looks that way. Now notice this is a belief, B2, right? It's my belief that it looks like blah, blah, blah. The lights are on. Now notice that this is a belief about the external world, B1 is, but this is not a belief about the external world. This is what we call an appearance belief. This is a belief about how things look. Another way of putting it would be to say, well, I believe that it seems like the lights are on. I think it's maybe a little less awkward to say, I believe that it looks like it rather than seems. But same sort of thing. So this external world belief gets justified in virtue of this appearance belief. I'll just call that one AB. All right? I can make it 1, 2 then if I want. And then what so then, you've got the annoying skeptic person, right? The person who's, on pain of an infinite regress, which can't be justified under any circumstances, according to the argument. Then how does this appearance belief get justified? And here's where foundationalism comes to the rescue, right? And it says that you're justified in virtue of it's actually looking that way. Notice that this thing at the bottom here, this is not a belief, right? This is just an experience. It's a certain kind of visual experience that I'm having right now. So regress is blocked, right? It's stopped at this point, and the idea is that this is a basic. So this is an experience, a visual experience. This is a basic. It's justified, but not in virtue of any other beliefs. It's justified in virtue of an experience, which is the same thing as a belief. And then this is a non-basic. At the top, this is an inferred belief or derived belief, right? And So what you get is you get this kind of picture. Souza has that famous article, The Raft and the Pyramid, and I think some people have said they wanted to talk about that for their presentation. So take a look at that after you read the chapter on foundational and coherentism. So what you get here is you get this kind of picture of sort of an upside down pyramid or a tree structure, where what you've got is at the lowest level, you've got the basics. And as you go higher up into the superstructure, you end up getting the derived beliefs or the inferred beliefs, right? We infer that the lights are on in the room, right? Based on it's looking like, believing that it looks that way. And we get the belief that it looks that way directly from an experience that we're having, that it in fact does look that way. So this is kind of the picture. What do people think? Questions, worries?
Well, what if you were the other way around? So you're in a room, the lights are dimly lit, and you believe the lights aren't on, and you believe that the lights are not on because it looks like the lights are on.
Right.
And you get down to you're experiencing that it actually looks that way. The
Yeah.
lights aren't on, but they're in fact on.
I'm struggling here. So
So
basically,
you're-
am I
you're-
malfunctioning?
No. I mean, I'm just asking, how would you work with this? Because this seems like I don't know. It seems off the bat like a common example, but I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure it's not.
So-
So like, let's say you're in like a movie theater or something like that. And
Yeah.
you think the lights are off, but they're in fact on. But they're just extremely dimly lit.
Mhm.
Or like they look to you like they're not on.
Yeah.
And so you believe that the lights are not on.
Right. And I'm justified in that
Why do you believe that? Well,
because it looks like they're not on.
And then it comes down to your experience of belief. Well, it actually looks like they're not on.
I was really looking that way. So it seems like it works, right?
Yeah, but they're on.
Well,
But you're thinking
so
they're
basically, you just have. So this is just a case where I've got a false justified belief, right?
Okay.
I hope. That's what it's like. You just want to. I mean,
Okay, well, I just
we don't
think
have a lot of
about
options.
it.
We either got to go
Yeah.
foundationalism, coherentism, infinitism's not going to get anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody's voting for that, right? I mean, it's cool and fun to think about, but
Coherentism?
no, infinitism.
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah, that's just something like that's something you defend a view like that just to get a publication.
Yeah.
Just because it's one way to try to get publications is defend wacky things that are that are kind of novel or provocative that get people's attention, right?
So you can
So-
just have a
False justified,
or
yeah. If it's really looking that way,
Yeah.
if it
okay.
really looks that way, so yeah, I mean,
So that's it. That shows you how things. So that's how the foundations would explain. Like, okay, so that's actually things how that's why they're different
yeah,
than how they are than how they seem.
yeah.
Right? Is that how they're?
Yeah, so keep in mind, I mean, it's foundationalism, it can be thought of as a theory about the structure of our knowledge or a theory about the structure of our justification for our knowledge claims. Either way is fine. But one thing in your case, in the example you're describing, it turns out that the belief is false,
Yeah.
right? So that you had the belief that the lights weren't on, but unbeknownst to you, they really were. Nevertheless, you were justified in believing that they weren't because you had the appearance belief to that effect, and the appearance belief was itself supported by the actual visual experience, which in your case, it really did look that way to you. So it seems to me like the best diagnosis of that situation is that it's a justified false belief. Now, of course, one of the issues that foundationalists face, and this is the difference between, say, classical Cartesian style foundationalism and Feldman's modest foundationalism that he sort of advocates at the end of the chapter, right, has to do with answering a bunch of questions. And sort of the three main ones, I'll put them up here for us. All right, so as I say here, generic foundationalism is committed to a couple of claims, right? First, that there are these justified basic beliefs, and then second, that all of our non-basics get justified in virtue of their relation to the basics. So we've got three questions we want to be able to answer about, or at least three, right? So which beliefs, what kinds of beliefs are the basics? What makes a basic belief basic for a person? And then finally, what sort of connection do the basics need to have to the non-basics in order for them to be justified? And Cartesian foundationalism, of course, gives us answers to this. Here they are. So the initial proposal, and again, this is sort of Descartes-inspired stuff, right? Because his particular program is extremely, he's got a very high standard that has to be satisfied, right? He's concerned, and if you think back to, say, Meditation 1, he's concerned there to be able to distinguish the beliefs that count as knowledge from beliefs that don't. And the way he analyzes justification is in terms of certainty, right? So not psychological certainty, like it happens to be a psychological fact about you that you can't bring yourself to seriously doubt a certain claim. That's maybe one sense of certainty. That's not the relevant one, though. Just that might just be a reflection of some sort of psychological foible on your part. Rather, what he means is impossibility of error. All right. So here's the initial setup right here. We've got the beliefs about one's own inner states, right? So you get those. These are introspective beliefs, basically, that it seems a certain way to you, or that it appears a certain way to you, that you're having a certain thought or belief, desire, sensation. All of those are fair game, right? Beliefs about those things, at least. And then what makes these guys basic, according to the classical view, is they're infallible. Beliefs like that are such that you can't be mistaken about them, you can't be wrong. Now keep in mind that I could be wrong about whether the lights are on. Suppose that they're really not on, and my brain's being stimulated artificially to have create in me the experience that I would be having if I really were in a room with the lights on, right? So sort of an evil demon, brain in a vat, Matrix kind of deal, right? So I could be mistaken about my external world belief, but according to the classical foundationalist, I can't be mistaken that it looks that way, right? And I can't be mistaken in my belief that that's how it looks to me. I can be mistaken that that's how it really is.
So we were talking in philosophy club, and the topic was introspection illusions.
Oh yeah.
So foundationalists would deny that there's a such thing.
Classical foundationalist, I think, would. Yeah. Can you say some more about that? What were the
Well,
examples?
I was there for only like 30 minutes or so, then I had to leave.
Yeah.
And Alan was there for the rest of it. So Alan could probably tell you more than I could.
Yeah. So what was the worry, Alan?
It was a very complicated subject, but I didn't think you could be
Wrong about your.
worried
'cause-
about introspection in that way. I brought up two different kinds of ways you can probably be
Mhm.
mistaken
Yeah.
as far as introspection. So let's say that someone truly believes that they are not racist or sexist,
Mm-hmm.
yet their actions display racist or sexist tendencies,
Mm-hmm.
but they constantly deny that.
Right.
So are they under the introspection illusion that they are not this way, but in reality they are, because people are witnessing their actions?
Yeah. Oh, geez. This is a tough case.
Yeah.
Part of what makes it hard is that we're thinking about. I'm not sure we're on the same topic completely here, because in that case there's your actions and then there's your beliefs, and so you're mistaken about your racist or sexist beliefs. You've got them, and in fact you don't believe that you've got them. That's the idea.
Something like that, yeah. Other people brought up ideas about
Yeah.
that, but that's what
So there's
I mainly got out of the
in this
conversation.
thanks, yeah. So in the same way with like knowledge, you can think about what you know, and you can think about whether you know that you know it.
Yeah.
Same thing here, it seems like with belief, right? I mean, you can believe something, but maybe not believe that you believe it.
And then, but the first part of that, because what kind of like made our talk just go like explode
Yeah.
was the only thing that the piece of paper said was introspection illusion, and I thought it sounded appealing, and I asked Alan if he felt like talking about it,
Yeah.
and he agreed. So we just kind of made a decision that was the topic we were gonna pick.
Right.
But the person who like put the topic in the hat wasn't there to describe what they really meant by it.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we were just kind of
They
like,
really needed to be there.
You
Yeah,
got
it
stuck
really-
doing somebody else's topic.
yeah. So we were just kind of like, okay. So then, at first I had the question of, well, is it possible for somebody to be wrong about like their emotional state, like the introspection emotional state? So like, I was like, well, nobody can be really. It doesn't seem like people can be wrong about like their sensations, like if they're like hungry hungry or feeling pain or cold.
Kind of like a headache, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how can I be mistaken if I believe that I've got a headache? You know, and and I believe that it feels a certain way. Seems like I have authoritative.
Yeah, but then my worry was somebody like, let's say that they could be mistaken about who they love or what they love, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or that they could be mistaken about like if they were actually like happy or mad. So I was like, well, to me it seems like, and I gave an example of like, so let's say you're in a conversation, like you and I are in a conversation,
Right.
or somewhere else, and it starts to get like heated kinda, and like everybody in the room right now would say like, yeah, Professor Gallagher's really pissed. But then like if I say, hey, it's not that big of a deal, like it's okay, you're getting upset, don't worry about it, and you say, no, I'm not mad at all, but like everybody else in the room would say like, yeah, he's clearly pissed, like chill out.
Right.
Like it seems like
Stop agitating him.
Yeah, so it seemed like something like, that either you're just like denying what you're really feeling, or you have some kind of, and I was like, well, if you can it seems like you would be wrong about what you were actually feeling. Like,
Yeah.
you saying you're mad when it seems you're mad, but you're saying you're not. Then in that case, if it seems like that you could probably be wrong, then
So denial, cases of like denial or self-deception.
That came up after you left.
Yeah.
Adam was describing that situation. And then I brought up the question that just blew it up. I was like, well, how do we know he's not just acting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Because
we can't read his mind, so we can't really know if he's mad or not.
yeah.
Yeah. So Tyler, you started having fun.
That kind of brings to mind the, I'm not sure the name of it, but the psychological phenomenon where it's like blind sight, where you're like, you don't see, but you do see it. You'll
Right.
avoid the object.
Somatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, it seems like there's a whole slew of like psychological cases or neurological things that would
Right.
maybe be able to help us inform, not to like, because that's a huge, the
Yeah,
implications
right.
are huge, but I don't know.
Sure.
I just, my worry is that like
introspections come under heavy attack, right?
yeah, like I mean, I'm not
20th
like a skeptic by nature, but it seems to me that people can be wrong about like what they think and believe and feel, because they're the only person that's really gauging it. You know what I mean? If they're gauging it poorly, then
They get it wrong.
yeah,
What did people think? I mean, we can come back to this later maybe, but Feldman has that frying pan example. You guys remember that? Yeah, where he's talking about you stumble on, you've been told that there's a frying pan that's really hot on the stove and to be careful around it, and you trip and you fall and you put your hand out to catch yourself and you touch the frying pan, and in that instant you believe that you're feeling a sensation of heat, that it's really hot, and after just another instant you become aware of the fact that you're not. But for that moment, it seems like you had a belief about how your own experience was going. Now, keep in mind that all these perceptual verbs are kind of weird because they can be used they can be kind of thought about in two different ways. So if I say that I see the cup on the table, right? That use of seeing, right, is where I'm two things have to happen. It has to first look like there's a cup on the table, and I have to actually be having that experience has to be being caused by the existence of a cup in the real world, actually connected to me in the right way. But there's also uses of these experiential verbs where all you're trying to do is just describe how your own experience is going. You're not committing yourself to any external stuff. And to talk that way, it's a little awkward, but Feldman and others that worked in this area have kind of Chisholm notably have coined this sort of locution, appeared to effly. So if I'm appeared to cuppishly, then that's just a kind of roundabout way of trying to indicate that I'm having a sort of cup experience. I'm appeared to cuppishly, and so if based on that experience, I go on and form the belief that there's a cup out there or something, then what you've got is kind of a basic belief, right? The belief that it looks that way, that it has that cuppish look to it, is a basic, and then from that I can then infer that that experience is being caused by a cup. notice that, I mean, this is another problem, we won't have time to get to it, I don't think, but we'll see. One of the way that the basics are supposed to be connected to the inferred beliefs according to the classical picture is through deduction. You're supposed to be able to deduce statements about the external world, let's say, from statements about your own mind together with beliefs you've got about your own state of mind, and then the laws of logic. That's, as you know from having read the chapter, that turns out to be a huge problem, right? Because it doesn't seem like any amount of evidence, short of conclusive evidence, would enable me to go from a belief about how it looks right now to how it is right now. Think about the same evidence principle, right? That kind of comes back into play here as well, because presumably I could have all the evidence that I've got right now for thinking that the cup is on the table and still turn out to be wrong about that, because that's a contingent empirical matter. If I'm a brain in a vat, then I'm not in a room with other people, and there's not a cup on this table in front of me because there's no table in front of me. Right? So there's worries here, I mean, for sure. When you think about how all these things are supposed to be connected up. So there's a handful of different questions, right? I mean, first of all, is CF2 a plausible sort of an account of what makes the basics basic? That they're infallibly true, can't be mistaken, right? And then certainly CF3, whether or not deduction is too restrictive. Are we gonna have to ultimately allow for inductive connections? And that's, of course, where it fell. So all of these things can be weakened if need be, right? We can allow in things in addition, things beyond just beliefs about our own mental states as well. So let me see if I can find that in here. Just so we're clear on this idea of certainty, because I can't presuppose that people have seen the same stuff before or seen any of this kind of stuff. Notice that there's a couple different senses. The psychological, I've got here the psychological versus the epistemic notion of certainty. So just to make them clear, I let this be indubitable for a person and this be certain for a person. But the point I was really trying to make was that seems like the word certain in ordinary English is ambiguous. It's arguably ambiguous between a couple different meanings. So if you're with your friend and you're going to go see a movie and you ask your friend if they verified them, if they're sure about the time of the movie, and they say yeah, and you say, seriously, are you certain? And they say, yeah, I'm certain. They probably don't mean that it's impossible that they're wrong. If they do, then they need to go back, take some more philosophy, right? Go take an epistemology course. What they mean is just some sort of expression like, I feel really confident that I know what time the movie starts. But when you drive up and they're wrong, clearly that kind of confidence isn't a reflection, need not be a reflection of anything more than some psychological dispositions in us, or a feeling of sureness or something like that. So that's not the relevant one. The relevant sense of certainty, of course, is the epistemic one, the one according to which it's impossible for you to be mistaken. Right? So then from there, let's see, we have to think about problems. But let me stop before I do that. Questions about any, like where we're at right now? Because I mean, like I said, it's a 40-page chapter, and there's a lot of stuff in there. So if there, in the future, make notes to yourself to ask in class or to email me about. Yeah, Alan.
Sure, not really too much of a question on what it is.
Yeah.
More so what it relates to. Does it relate to terms like a priori and a posteriori truths about the world?
Does certainty relate to that, or does foundationalism relate to that?
Just what we're talking about. Say that S cannot be mistaken, that P is true.
Right.
Say that P stands for all red things are colored.
Mm-hmm.
So he can't be mistaken.
Yeah, you can't be wrong about any necessary truth, right? Yeah. So keep in mind that there's a threefold set of distinctions, and you've been, probably, I'm guessing almost everybody in here, if not everyone, is familiar with some of these distinctions. But there's the a priori, a posteriori distinction. There's the necessary contingent distinction. And then there's a third one, which is probably, if any of them is unfamiliar, this is probably it. The analytic synthetic, the people heard of that too? The analytic-synthetic distinction. So it's important to keep these things all sort of separate in your mind, because in the old days, the way it sort of looked was, and by old days I just mean prior to Kripke and sort of what was going on in the middle part of, you know, the 60s, 1960s or so. Prior to that, the picture was sort of like this. You had the a priori and the a posteriori. And you had the necessary and the contingent, and then you had the analytic, so-called analytic, and the synthetics. And the idea was all of these guys go together, and all of these guys go together. That's sort of the old classical picture. So this is an epistemological distinction, the a priori, a posteriori. The necessary contingent distinction is a logical distinction, and the analytic synthetic distinction is a linguistic distinction. So in the sort of the classical picture, if something was a priori, then it was also necessarily true, and it was an analytic truth. So truth in virtue of meaning alone. So things like all red things are colored, no bachelor is married. But in the 20th century, middle part of the 20th century, a little after that, there was a kind of a new theory of reference in philosophy of language, and under the auspices of people like pioneers like Kripke, people started wondering, well, first of all, the analytic-synthetic distinction started to not be as something that was of much concern. I mean, maybe that's overstating a little bit, but Quine attacked the analytic-synthetic distinction in a famous paper called Two Dogmas of Empiricism, where he argues that everything's synthetic. There aren't any analytic truths at all. Truth's purely in virtue of meaning. So synthetic and analytic truth was supposed to be something like all red things are colored, as opposed to all red things are greater than 3 feet in diameter. That's clearly synthetic, right? Because that's just right. But so this distinction's gotten less play. I mean, it still gets used a bit in different areas of philosophy of language, perhaps. But certainly the necessary contingent, which is logical, and the a priori, a posteriori, which is epistemological, these get discussed a lot. And according to the sort of Kripkean view, it could turn out to be like this. Turn out that they cut across each other. Which, if you think about it, kind of makes sense, because they're entirely different. They're based on different sorts of considerations. I mean, this stuff right here, everybody, well, I can't assume that either, I suppose, that people know what the difference is between the a priori and the a posteriori. Anybody want to try to say?
A priori statements are statements that you know just in understanding the terms in use. Like, all red things are colored, all bachelors are unmarried males.
Right.
Things that are true in virtue of meaning. And a posteriori are statements that you come to know through investigation.
Thanks. Yeah, some sort of observational work. Good, Alan.
Like the lights are on.
Yeah.
That's a posteriori.
Right. So good. So and again, a priori statement's one that as soon as you understand what it's saying, you're in a position to see that it's true, and often that it has to be true. I'm going to leave it open whether there could be contingent a priori statements, or whether everything that's knowable a priori is necessarily true, because that's a matter of some controversy if Kripke's redrawing the lines, right? So take a statement like water equals H2O. That's an empirical discovery. We had to do some hydrogen chemistry to figure that out. And people for a long time didn't know what the microstructure of water was, right? In ancient times, let's say. So it's an empirical discovery that water is H2O, but because we're talking about an identity, and all identity statements are necessarily true if they're true at all, then it looks like you've got a case of a necessary a posteriori statement. It's necessarily true that water is H2O, but you couldn't have figured that out just by reflecting from the armchair. You have to actually get out in the world and make some observations. Another sort of example of a contingent a priori statement might be I exist, right? Seems like I can know that I exist along with Descartes just by stumbling across the cogito, right? So he's in that famous cogito passage in Meditation 2, where he wonders whether he could, could it turn out that maybe even he doesn't exist. and he tries to deny his own existence, and it boomerangs, right? It kind of backfires, and he has this sort of aha moment, this insight. Realizes that even if he's mistaken about everything, that he could be mistaken at all, be deceived at all, means that he has to exist. Right? Existence is a precondition for anything. So, in a case like that, I exist would be knowable as soon as you think the thought or understand it. But it's not necessarily true that you exist. If your parents had never met, you wouldn't be here. So it's contingently true. So this is sort of the key picture now. That they, and of course there are going to be plenty of things that are necessary and a priori, like 2 + 2 = 4, or all bachelors are unmarried. And then there are going to be plenty of things that are contingent and a posteriori, like Alan said, like that the lights are on right now. It's contingently true. It didn't have to be that way. It's not a matter of logic. And you had to make some observations in order to get to know that. Some observations of the world. So good. And now I'm trying to remember, how do we get off on this? Because you were asking something, Alan, about...
Yeah, I was trying to make the connection between foundationalism and a posteriori statements.
Oh, okay.
It seems like those foundational beliefs have to be so basic that they are like a posteriori statements.
I think, I want to be careful here. So the introspective, the basic beliefs, okay, that it looks like the lights are on, which is supposed to justify me in believing that it's true that the lights are on. That basic belief, so-called, right, that it looks that way, presumably that's something that's knowable a priori, I would think, right? Because as soon as you... hold on a minute, maybe I don't want to go there. Maybe that does turn out to be a posteriori.
Because what if I step out of the room right now and you guys decide to flip the switch a couple times and then ask me
Yeah.
to go and
Yeah, it's hard to know what to think about these. Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. This is actually good stuff to think about, because Feldman doesn't talk about the a priori and the a posteriori there.
Yeah, while I was reading it, I was like, well, this foundationalism sounds a lot like a posteriori. Like,
Yeah.
it's basic.
Well, and especially since it gets marshaled primarily to validate, different sense of valid than the logic one here, but to legitimate or shore up primarily our external world beliefs, our perception, and we get those through perception. So it's beliefs about the external world. Clearly, so how do I want to put this? I don't know. I'll have to think about it a little bit, but yeah, you're getting me worried now that it's not a bad thing necessarily. If it turns out that these basic beliefs are a posteriori, primarily, because they're introspective beliefs, they're beliefs about how things seem to you, and so it would seem like as soon as you understood what was being said, you might be in a position to know whether or not it's true, because if you have some sort of authoritative first-person access, so-called privileged access to your own mental states. But because they contain embedded within them claims about how things look about the world, that's what makes it seem like it may be a posteriori. I'll have to think about it and let you know what I think. Good point though, thanks. It's helpful. But notice that bottom line is it looks like on the classical picture, at every level, whether it's the level of the experience that you're having, or the level of your belief about how your experience is going, or your belief that that's the way the world is, they could separate off at every level, right? In other words, it could break down, and each of those links in the chain could kind of break down. So it might be that you could be having a certain sensory experience and either not have a belief about how you're appeared to. That's often probably the case, right? You're sensing all the time, and that was one of the objections to classical foundationalism, right? Is there's not going to be enough basics, or it's not psychologically realistic. People don't do what we're doing right now. This only happens in a classroom, right? And it's only usually in epistemology. I never was really for my own part that worried about the objection that this picture is psychologically unrealistic, because I never really felt like it was supposed to be. I just felt like it was that's sort of setting the foundationalist up for failure, because the real task is just providing a theoretical account of how it is that our justification is structured, right? And it seems like even if, from a standpoint of psychological reality, people don't form these intervening beliefs, they're available. They're out there if they wanted to form them. They could. And if you get them in certain situations, like in philosophy classrooms where the stakes are high, and let's say like you're having a discussion about skepticism, and you start pressing on people to give justification for their beliefs about the immediate environment, then oftentimes they will retrace to, well, I believe that the lights are on right now because it looks like the light. I believe that it looks like the lights are on, and I believe that it looks like the lights are on in virtue of it's looking that way. The very experience itself contributes justification to the intermediate appearance belief, and then up the chain to the derived belief. So this is one of the sort of problems with the classical foundationalist approach, right? I mean, it looks like at each of these levels, things can start to break down. So here's 3 problems for classical foundationalism that Feldman discusses. And take a look at these. So here's one idea, we've talked about some of this already, but that appearance beliefs might not be certain in the way that the foundationalist claims that they are. Looks like there might not be enough basic beliefs. And then finally, looks like deduction is maybe not going to be enough. So let me just pause for a second and see if people have comments, thoughts, questions, need me to say more or less.
That definitely makes sense. I was definitely thinking about the first 2.
Yeah.
The first one, definitely, because I just keep thinking about the man that thought he saw a sheep in the field,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't really a sheep.
Yes, I mean, like in the Gettier case with the sheep in the field thing. But keep in mind that he believes that there's a sheep in the field, right? And he turns out to be mistaken, is wrong. I mean, well, he turns out in that example to be right, but not for the reasons he thinks, right?
Yeah.
So, in order to make it analogous, we have to have not only the belief that there's a sheep in the field, but an appearance belief to back that up, which is that it looks to me like there's a sheep. I believe that it looks like there's a sheep in the field, and in virtue of that belief, I get justified in believing that there is in fact a sheep in the field. But clearly, things can look one way and be another way, so there's no deductive connection there, right? That's to the third point. That basically seems like we're going to have to allow for inductive connections between the basics and the non-basics, right? So what you end up with is something like, well, look, the best justification I have for my belief that the lights are on right now, if you're inclined toward foundationalism, is that I have an additional belief available to me, which is that I believe it looks like the lights are on, right? And my justification for believing that it looks like the lights are on is just, it's looking that way itself, right? But from the experience to the intervening appearance belief, which is a basic, all the way up to the external world belief, which is inferred, there's a gap at each level, and you got to somehow span that gap, right? And so from the basics to the non-basics, we're going to need inductive connections there. So it's going to be something like, well, for the most part, or probably, or in most cases when it's looked, in most cases when I've believed that it looks a certain way, then it turns out that it is a certain way. But we know that there are lots of cases where, looks can be deceiving. The stick in the water doesn't really bend. The railroad tracks don't converge to a point off in the distance, and on and on and on, right? So we have to, we learn, fortunately, from experience, we think, right? At least this is the initial leg of the response to the skeptic, that, well, we can, from experience and trial and error, learn when we can trust ourselves and when we can't, right? And there can be various degrees of mismatch between your cognitive system and the external world, right? I mean, it could be a case where you're not functioning properly, there's some cognitive malfunction that's causing things to look a certain way and they're not really that way. Could be that you're in an environment that's, so to speak, rigged against you. So if you're in the fun house at the carnival or whatever, the floors are all askew and the walls are weird and the mirrors are weird, obviously that's kind of an environment that you can pretty easily get things wrong in, because it's messing with your senses. Right? And then there are just going to be cases like the stick in the water and the railroad tracks, where it's not like the environment's out to play you false, but there's just a kind of mismatch in terms of fit between how your cognitive system works and the deliverances of it, right? Whether it gets true beliefs at the end of it or not. So that would take us then down to moderate foundationalism, which is where Feldman ends up. I'll just show you this real quick. So we're making some progress. This is good. I wasn't sure how far I'd be able to get, because I want to be able to, for next week, start talking about chapter 5, which reminds me, by the way. So go ahead and take a look. Has anybody gotten into chapter 5 yet to see it? I can't remember if it's as long as chapter 4 or not. Let's see. So chapter 5 is about non-evidentialist approaches. And it's, it's another good 20-some pages, it looks like. So I would go ahead and try to read chapter 5 for Monday. And then we'll see if there's some follow-up on chapter 4. I haven't said much at all about coherentism yet. So Feldman sort of ultimately formulates moderate, right, or modest foundationalism. And it may not be the most exciting view, because it seems, but it's often the one that seems correct, right, in light of all these kinds of problems for the classical picture. And basically it gives a different answer to each of these questions, right? So which beliefs are the basic ones? Well, you get the spontaneously formed beliefs, right? And what makes them basic? Well, there's some sort of proper response to the experience that one's having. It's a direct, proper response. How are the inference connected? Well, you get these undefeated inductive inferences, right? So it does, and this picture does seem to me pretty tempting. I mean, I'm in the room right now, the lights are on, but if you hit the switch, the lights go out. I just, instantly find myself no longer believing that the lights are on, believing that the lights are off. Pretty confident that I'm justified in that. Whether it counts as knowledge or not depends on whether it's true, which involves considerations that are sort of, beyond the scope of this part right here. That would involve a full-scale response to various kinds of skeptical arguments and skeptical attacks. But it does seem that this could help us get justified about our beliefs in the immediate environment and on the foundationalist picture. Now, of course, the coherentist denies this distinction between basics and non-basics. So for coherentists, no, there isn't a class of privileged beliefs. All beliefs are on an equal playing field, is the idea. Quine's picture, just for what it's worth, he sort of popularized it, though. I think people like Bonjour and Keith Lear are better as epistemologists, and they're sort of the people I think of when I think of the coherence theory. But Quine has advocated it, and he advocated it a little bit earlier on, so he gets mentioned in there. According to him, all of our knowledge, or justified beliefs about the world, is like a gigantic web. And you got all these little nodes inside this big web, right? If you've ever played with a spider web in real life or touched one or something, you know how they work. I mean, it's like you touch one little part of the web and it ripples through everything. So you can get from any one node in the web to any other point in the web without having to go outside of it, so to speak. So for Quine, what you get on this view, this is the core. What he says is that our beliefs about the way the world are, or the way the world is, these are the beliefs that lie along the periphery, right here. They're at the edges of the web. And as you start to go more toward the interior, what happens is eventually you'll reach the core. And the measure from the outside edge to the interior is a measure of how reluctant we are to revise our beliefs in light of any kind of new considerations. So a belief about the cup on the table, right, it's out here at the edge of the web of belief. It's a belief about the world, it's contingent, it's a posteriori, right? And although I hope I'm mostly right about those kinds of beliefs, I know that I've been wrong a lot in the past about them. Something can look away and not be that way, right? You can think it's your best friend that you see in the distance, and you get up close and it's just somebody who looks like your best friend. So those kinds of beliefs, contingent empirical claims about the world, these are easily revised in light of various new experiences that we have or new information that we get. But here in the center, as we travel inward, we eventually get to like the laws of logic and mathematics in the core, and we're really reluctant to give those up. Quine's a pragmatist about things, so he says that that reluctance may or may not be philosophically justified or justifiable. It may just turn out to be a reflection of our kind of bias, right, or a reflection of certain theoretical considerations that we've embraced having to do with overall simplicity, providing the best explanation of our total explanation of our experience or whatnot. But he doesn't say that these aren't basics for Quine per se. They're all still resting within this overall web of belief. And if we have to make changes here, we can. Certain kinds of experiences could necessitate changes even there. So for example, in light of various quantum mechanical considerations, we may have to abandon, let's say, the law of excluded middle or something, right? That would be to give up a really fundamental logical claim, but we could do it, so says Quine at least. Right? So this is kind of this coherence picture. Another way to think about the coherentist kind of approach to things is that there aren't any beliefs that are justified independently of any other beliefs. Right? Every belief gets at least some of its justification from its connection to the other beliefs, either within the web, right? Yeah.
Real fast, if he has a core set of beliefs, how is that different from having
Basics.
basic
Yeah.
belief, you know?
Yeah, so how does this view avoid being foundationalist in nature? Because he's very critical of foundationalism in his work.
But it seems to like at least parallels.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's good to call him out on that. I mean, I think he would just say, well, using Feldman's terminology, I mean, the main difference is that they're not technically basics because they in part,
They're not certain.
well, yeah, they may not be certain. They may be necessary truths, but they may or may not be certain for us. Keep in mind that, I mean, this is something Feldman says in the chapter 2, you probably already came across it, but, you know, this idea that what makes the classical foundationalist basic beliefs basic is that they're infallible. Well, I mean, any belief in a necessary truth is an infallible belief. But so suppose I come to believe some complicated logical claim that turns out to be a theorem of first order logic. It's necessarily true. But suppose that I just get the belief. It's not like I really even understand the logical statement. I just get the belief in it. That can't be wrong. So it's infallible. It's an infallible belief. Hardly seems to have any merit from the epistemic point of view. It doesn't seem to be epistemically justified if I just it's like a lucky guess, right? So even at that level, you might think that classical foundationalists need to come up with a better explanation of what makes the basics basic. What's an alternative to infallibility is some sort of certainty, which sounds more like an epistemic cognate, right? That you're certain that P is true in the sense that it's you have conclusive evidence for thinking that P is true, because that brings in the notion of evidence and awareness in the way that we need. But yeah, so back to Tom's question though, it does sort of vaguely resemble, well, not even so much vaguely, but resemble a kind of variant form of foundationalism. But he's going to say that it's not foundationalism technically, because those core beliefs can be revised in light of future experiences.
So the foundationists would say your basic beliefs can't be revised whatsoever?
Yeah, the basics are they're unrevisable or incorrigible, can't be corrected. Because they're all appearance beliefs. You can't be mistaken about how your beliefs about your own state of mind.
And you couldn't really have a belief, excuse me, with a probability of one, because then it wouldn't really, how could you even say it's a belief at that point? At least to me, that doesn't seem to make any sense.
A belief,
Like, you couldn't have a belief that didn't have some degree of uncertainty, or else it's like, it doesn't really mean, it's not a belief, it's not.
it rises to some other level or something.
Yeah,
Well, think about
it's-
all your belief that 2 + 2 = 4.
That's
That's-
still insofar of my experience. I already explained that I don't care for like the a priori.
The a priori,
So
yeah.
so I think that the only reason I know 2 + 2 = 4 is because of my experience in the world of seeing.
Huh.
Because I mean, without that experience, you'd have nothing to inform that initial idea at all. Even you wouldn't have math.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we keep it. Thanks, Howie. I appreciate it. So, this will, and we'll eventually probably get to talk about the a priori in more detail. But this is important to that, to sort of framing that debate in the right way. So, the person who believes in the distinction, like I do, they grant that you have to have had some initial experiences in order to get the stock of concepts that are involved in whatever the claim is, right? So if I'm considering that all red things are colored, I had to learn the names for the colors as a little kid. And I had to learn what all is, that it's a universal quantifier. I had to learn what a color is. So I had experience in Mill's sense, right? This empiricist sense. I had experiences, perceptual experiences and whatnot, sensory experiences, in order to get that stock of concepts. But that doesn't answer the question. What we really want to know is how we can account for the fact that there seem to be some truths that are such that as soon as you understand what's being said, you don't have to make any observations in order to know them. And there are other truths like that there's 12 people in the room next door. I understand perfectly well what's being said, but I have no idea whether that's true right now. It's not justified for me one way or the other, and I don't know it. In part because to answer that question, to get justified in it, I've got to make a bunch of observations, right? So I just want to make that one little point, that because I think sometimes people, it's easy to sort of think that, oh, the a priori is ridiculous because we have to have all had some experience. Like look at how we develop. Look at developmental psychology. Experience plays such a huge role in the beginning, and at every point for most of us, right? But that wouldn't be quite fair, I think, to the defenders of the a priori to pin them with that. I mean, we grant that you've got to have experience to get the concepts initially. It's just once you've got them, like a equals a. Seems to me like as soon as you understand that, you know it. It's a priori.
But there could also be a case in which something would lead you to change that belief.
Really?
There has to be, or else it wouldn't seem to have meaning.
I can't imagine. I mean, whatever.
Well,
The thing being
for the
diverse
example,
from itself.
Like how would I convince you like that 2 + 2 = 5?
Yeah.
By demonstrating it, I guess. I mean,
Oh,
I know it sounds silly, but like.
Yeah, you might. I mean, so you might be able to. I don't know. I'm just thinking. You might be able to convince some people of some stuff, but since it's not true and it's impossible, it couldn't ever be a real proof of that. But
Well, yeah, assuming it is true. But
Yeah. Right. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I'm sorry for keeping you a little bit over. I will see you next time.